Welcome to the InfoWars Nightly News. I'm David Knight. It's Thursday, September 4th, 2014. Now, it's hard to believe that after decades of looking at Vietnam, what we've learned about that, what we've learned about the Gulf of Tonkin incident, that we would not only learn nothing from those experiences, from those revelations, that we would repeat them today, and not only repeat them, but times 4. Look at this headline from the story on Infowars.com. U.S. boots in Iraq, in the Baltics, in Syria, and troops in the Ukraine. Yes, it's been a busy week for U.S. military planners. They point out as the NATO summit in Wales is kicking off today with an expected agreement to create a spearhead force of up to 5,000 troops to rapidly deploy to any, quote, hotspot in Eastern Europe, we find that these exercises, now called Rapid Trident, are said to be a sign of the commitment of NATO states to support non-NATO member Ukraine. And of course, in many other places, they're also anxious to go to war. We have a Democrat senator from Florida, Senator Bill Nelson, is pushing legislation to authorize the use of military force, but the Obama administration says, that's all right, we don't really need it. Remember, we had that conversation before with Defense Secretary Leon Panetta when he was quizzed by Senator Sessions, and Senator Sessions couldn't believe that he would say, you don't need to, we would talk to our NATO allies, we would talk to the UN, but Congress, probably not. We might inform you of what we're going to do. As the writer Daniel McAdams of the Ron Paul Institute points out, he says the peace president is clearly on war footing. U.S. bombs are also going off in Africa and in Pakistan, and no one at home is now talking about NSA spying. NATO has a new mission. Well, let's hope that the new mission does not blow up in their faces, this exercise right at the Russian border. Doesn't blow up in their faces like their sanctions have. Look at this article from the New American. Sanctions boomerang and threaten the U.S. supply of Russian rocket engines. Well, why would we need Russian rocket engines? Well, that's for our spy satellites. They point out that in response to sanctions from Obama in March and then escalating those in July, the Russian deputy minister has threatened to cut off all supplies of RD-180 rocket engines to the United States. And listen to this quote here. It's noteworthy that even though a group of school children probably could have forecast the consequences of making Russia our supplier of these critical rocket engines, all the wisdom of the U.S. government missed it. And one of those aware of the decision to deal exclusively with Russia for the U.S. supply of engines was Michael Hayden during his stint as director of the NSA from 1999 to 2005. Now, Hayden is now putting himself out as a very highly paid consultant. You know, for a few $100,000, he can come in and give you some inside information. He might even tell you how to fix your security. But this is what he had to say about those times. He says, well, what were we thinking? It's clear now that relying on Russia for rocket engines was a policy based on hope and not good judgment. Well, actually, our policies today are based on hubris. When we outsource even our military equipment, even the NSA's equipment is outsourced to Russia, to China, we have no way to enforce these kinds of sanctions or this kind of aggressive foreign policy that we're now engaged in. But talk about bad judgment. We have the former senator of Massachusetts, Senator Brown, who's now running for senator in New Hampshire. This is the senator who posed for a centerfold, if you remember. Maybe we should call him Senator Fold. Well, he's got a great idea. He's trying to piggyback on all this unrest about ISIS, and he thinks that the way we could fix this is by revoking the citizenship of people that the government accuses of terrorism. And even better, we can have Obama do it by executive order. Here's that report.
Former senator, model, and centerfold Scott Brown now wants to strip you of your rights and due process. Former Massachusetts Senator Scott Brown is now running for senator in New Hampshire, but he sounds like he's auditioning to become a prostitute for the military-industrial complex.
Right now, we have a situation with ISIS.
Scott Brown actually says he's worried about U.S. citizens working with foreign terrorists coming home, marching down Pennsylvania Avenue, and planting their flag at the White House. His common sense solution is to take away their citizenship, to keep them from returning to the U.S. Seriously, how stupid does Brown think New Hampshire voters are? Millions of people are coming at will through our open borders without permission. The feds are even telling us to expect terrorists to come across the border, and there's nothing that they can or will do about it. So why would a terrorist be stopped by not having permission to come in? Scott Brown voted for the NDAA's indefinite detention without trial, and he now says that it's common sense that anyone accused by the government of terrorism would have their rights as citizens stripped without trial. He offered 2 bills to do just that. Both were rejected. But just like Obama, Brown doesn't want the legislative process or the Constitution to get in the way of the militarized police state. Just use executive orders. Al-Qaeda and ISIS were created, trained, and equipped by the federal government. People like Obama and Brown want to make it as easy and as expedient as possible to punish, to imprison, to kill anyone they declare a terrorist. This is what tyrants have always done. The whole point of the Bill of Rights was to constrain government from taking away our due process. They want to be able to hold you without a conviction, without a trial. And if it sounds draconian to do that to citizens, then just revoke their citizenship first. Political prostitutes like Scott Brown use Islamic terrorists to sell fear to the American public so that they give up their rights and liberties and buy war machines from the military and police state industrial complex. Homeland Security has made it abundantly clear that it's more worried about domestic terrorists than foreign terrorists. And look at who they're defining as terrorists: veterans, Tea Partiers, anti-Fed activists, Christians, homeschoolers. Americans are the enemy in their war games. They train to fight Americans and mock American cities. The Patriot Act, which Brown voted to reauthorize, has always had the goal to destroy due process, to come after dissidents and political opponents at home by labeling them as terrorists. Brown's demagoguery is just the latest example. If you're going to revoke the citizenship of people who are working with terrorists, then why not revoke the citizenship of the CIA or the military advisors who train and equip terrorist groups like ISIS, like Al-Qaeda? Why not revoke the citizenship of Senator McCain, who met with Islamic terrorists and who met with Nazi terrorists in Ukraine?
Meeting in the White House over 2 years ago, everyone in the national security team recommended arming ISIS.
Do you agree that we have recent experience where until we understood how the country would continue to govern and that institutions of governance wouldn't fail, that actually situations can be made worse by the introduction of military force?
Actually, General Dempsey, you and I went through this in 2006.
Maybe we could keep political whores like Scott Brown out of the Senate.
Well, it's not just people like Scott Brown who are trying to use to their advantage the unrest in the Middle East. We have an article on Infowars.com that really underscores the absurdity of our involvement over there, the fiction of, quote, fighting the Islamic State, unquote. An entity created and financed by the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. And he points out that the U.S. is taking advantage of the incontestable threat posed by the brutal, quote, IS combatants in order to polish their damaged image in the Middle East and simultaneously try to underline that their further military presence in the region is indispensable. That's right. They need to have us there, don't they? We are the ones who have to solve all of these problems, no matter how bad they are. And yet he points out that we actually created them. He says, at the same time, the virtual inventor of the IS is none other than former U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. Now, he's pointing this out as saying that it was her policy of separating these different areas and moving the Sunnis against the Shiites, that was essentially a policy that created IS. I think the direct involvement of the U.S. via the CIA and many other instances has been documented. It's been spoken about by former CIA members, by former Al-Qaeda members. We've talked about this at InfoWars quite a bit. So yes, there are policies that you can point to that were open and above board which created this, but there are also covert policies that directly created IS. Now, he also points out that Secretary of the Saudi National Security Council at the same time, the infamous, he points out, Prince Bandar bin Sultan, set to work after Condoleezza Rice set these policies in place. The results were the birth of brutal groups like Al-Nusra Front and the ISIS, which sprang up like mushrooms to fight the Assad regime in Syria. Now, of course, Prince Bandar had very heavy ties to the CIA, to the Bush family. He bragged about how he, the Saudis, and the CIA had essentially created the Mujahideen and Osama bin Laden. So this is something that we see happening. That's a long-time policy. And of course, they were created to fight the Russians. And that's one of the 4 conflicts that we're trying to get involved in right now. But there's a meeting, as we said earlier in the show, going on starting right now in Wales with NATO. And they're not really putting forward a veneer of somebody who's really striking out for freedom, as we're being told that they're doing in the Ukraine. Look at the heavy-handed approach that they are taking towards journalists who are just merely trying to film what a police state, what an open-air prison, as they call it, looks like in Wales around this secure meeting. Now, this is a journalist who was working for RT. He was arrested. He was DNA swabbed. He was held in a prison cell for taking photographs of police security barriers on public streets in Cardiff, Wales, as the lockdown surrounding the NATO summit in Wales resembles what Paul Watson points out, as some called it, an open-air prison. Now, he points out that they had made numerous checks, numerous threats to him. Eventually, what they arrested him for was the charge of suspicion of a stolen driver's license. And he said, it's amazing because all of my other ID there, a debit card, a library card, a student card, all in the same wallet, had the same name. Not very likely that he had just stolen the wallet. Well, stay with us. After the break, we have a couple of stories. Workers are fighting for minimum wage increase, but they don't see the real threat from the rise of the robots. And the net is leaking like a sieve. We're going to look at how thieves got those photos from the celebrities. Stay with us.
City of Austin tap water versus filtered City of Austin tap water.
I can taste dirt in it.
God knows what's in this.
This has an aftertaste.
Tastes like Austin water? Yeah, it does. Ugh.
These people just sampled City of Austin tap water straight from the faucet. Next, we had them try a sample of tap water filtered through the ProPure G2.0 filtration system.
High quality H2O.
That one is better.
Tastes like nothing.
Yep, I know what good water tastes like. It's good water.
Most tap water contains added substances like fluoride, chlorine, Monsanto's deadly pesticide, glyphosate, and many others. Studies prove that these substances are linked to an assortment of major health issues, including tooth decay, lowered IQ, and even cancer.
It tastes like you're drinking out of the lake when you're drinking tap water.
It has that processed flavor to it.
The ProPure G2.0 filtration system removes these deadly substances and many more, leaving only fresh-tasting, deliciously clean water.
Okay, this is very tasty.
It's good water.
Refreshing.
It's good.
Go to InfoWarsStore.com today. Use promo code WATER and save 10% off your ProPure purchase. Again, that's InfoWarsStore.com or call 1-888-253-3139.